Zoo-wee mama! How's it going, everybody? I'm here today to talk about the newest card coming to Marvel Snap, Miek, or as I'm going to call him for the rest of this video, Miek. Miek is a 1-cost, 1-powered card with the ability that after each turn, if you discarded any cards, gain +1 power for each and move. So just to add some clarification, if it was turn 5, for example, and you had Miek on board and you discarded 4 cards from your hand, at the end of turn 5 and right before turn 6 starts, Miek would gain +4 power and he would move once. So no matter how many cards you discard, he will only move 1 time at the end of each turn. Now, before I go into the details of how strong I think Miek is and where he fits into the game, and show off 2 deck examples that I've put together that I'll be trying out with him once he's released, it's important to note that Miek is the cheapest card to come out in January. He's going straight into Series 4. That means he's only 3,000 tokens, so that is a huge plus. And he's going to be in spotlights with Annihilus and Phoenix Force come January 16th. And this is okay. Annihilus is a good card. He was just nerfed. I do think Annihilus is still pretty strong, but it is important to note that you're getting a card that was just nerfed. And Phoenix Force is okay. Phoenix Force does work fairly well in the Move Destroy deck, but that's basically the only time you play it. So if that's not your type of deck, you're really never gonna play Phoenix Force. I basically never play Phoenix Force. And the variants themselves are just okay. The Phoenix Force one is kind of whatever. The Annihilus one isn't bad, but Annihilus just has a lot of good variants. And the Miek one kind of looks like normal Miek, except he's facing the other direction. So if you want Miek in basically the same pose but facing the other way, then maybe that's a good variant. But overall, I think it's a bit of a weaker spotlight cache unless you don't yet have Annihilus or Annihilus and Phoenix Force. So to get into the decks that I will be trying out with Miek, first up, I'm going to be doing this nice Miek Control discard. It is important to note that Miek gets power for every card that's discarded. It doesn't matter how strong those cards were. Okay, it's not like Black Knight where you want to discard like an Infinite so you get a really strong Ebony Blade. Miek works just like Morbius. Okay, so him and Morbius are basically a package deal. Miek and Morbius, best friends. You're going to want them in every deck together because they just get stronger based on the quantity of cards discarded. So in this deck, we've got Miek powering up, Snow Guard to help add cards to hand and also give us some options to mess with locations. Blade is nice, cheap discard. Morbius powers up whenever Miek powers up. Luke Cage is good to protect our cards that are powering up. Kyera protects our 1-cost cards and it can protect Apocalypse coming down on the last turn. Dawkin, very nice. He adds a card to our hand, which means it's another card that gets discarded. So that powers up Miek. Lady Sif, Dracula, MODOK, great discard package with Apocalypse, and then we've even got Leech in there to be a bit annoying, just really piss our opponents off, because nobody likes getting hit with Leech. So this deck is a nice kind of hybrid between this discard power, mainly cheap discard power, but also some control deck options. And in here, you can play MODOK on turn 6 still if you wanted. The nice thing about having Miek and Morbius on the board is if you didn't get MODOK off on turn 5, or if you wanted to play him on turn 6, you can, and he's still powering up your other cards. Okay, so it's a great option there. The next deck that I'll be using with Miek is this Magic Miek discard. Now this deck is a bit more RNG based. It does try to make a bunch of copies of Swarm. So we've got cards in here like Calling Wing, Gambit, Moon Knight, and Hellcow, and these are less targeted discard. It's more randomized. Basically, other than Calling Wing, all of those options are completely random for your hand. But if you can make a bunch of copies of Swarm, hitting Wolverine is okay, and hitting Apocalypse is okay, you're just gonna power up Miek and Morbius a ton. You're gonna have a lot of power on the board, and we still have Kyera in here to make sure Miek doesn't die to Killmonger. So this deck is a bit more RNG based. I think it's less consistent, but it can go a bit bigger, and you might be able to get an early retreat if Gambit starts off really strong. Now, just to get into my final take on Miek, I think it's a pretty good card. Okay, in terms of fun, I think he's really fun. He's a 1-cost card that doesn't really have a ceiling, especially if you have Apocalypse and Swarm, these cards that can get discarded multiple times. Miek doesn't really have a power ceiling. Okay, he's easily gonna hit 3 to 5 power, but if you draw well, he could easily be more than 5. Okay, he's probably gonna see around 7 to 8. I think in a deck that uses Modok, you can reasonably discard like 5 to 7 cards. So I think for a 1-cost card, he's gonna be strong, and then him bouncing around the board adds a fun factor. It does make him a bit hard to plan. It's good that he only moves once, essentially. You know, if he's on the left lane and you discard cards, you know he's gonna end up on the middle or right. There's no chance that he goes to the middle and then comes back left or anything, because he only moves once. But it is still 50-50. You don't know for sure where he's gonna end up unless you filled one of the lanes and he can't move there. But I think he's a fun card. Flexibility, not really there. He's obviously meant for discard, but I do think it adds something new to discard. Again, with a card like Black Knight, it's all about just discarding something really big and powerful and slamming down that power. And discard has also seen a lot of Hela play, like Modok Hela behind Invisible Woman, where you discard huge powered cards and then just bring them back with Hela. There hasn't been much for discard that's like early game, tempo, build up power, control the board more. It's been more of these big combo, slap down big power in the later turns. And so Miek kind of helps to add variety to the discard archetype. He is tied to discard, but he can help with a new discard style of deck, like the 2 decks that I just showed. They're very early game, cheap, tempo focused. So I think that's very interesting. But if you don't like discard, then you probably don't like Miek, right? I mean, that's just the honest truth. In terms of being competitive, I think he's pretty good. He is tied to discard, and I don't think he's broken there, but it's another solid option, and it's a 1-cost card. If you look at the Destroy archetype, Destroy now runs off of Deadpool, X23, and it will try to do Forge and Nico as well. Okay, Destroy starts off from turn 1 with power on the board. Okay, the combos start with the 1-cost cards. Discard is becoming a very similar situation. You've got Black Knight, which is very strong. You've got Blade, which was pretty recently buffed and is a good tool. And now you've got Miek's. Now we've got all these cheap options that can really help add to the archetype and start off the power as early as turn 1. So I think that makes Miek pretty strong. Personally, I'm going to be picking him up with tokens. Again, he is Series 4, and those are the best cards to pick up with tokens because they only cost 3,000. I do also own Annihilus and Phoenix Force, and I'm not a huge fan of any of the variants, so I'm going to be picking him up with tokens. I think he's only worth Spotlight Cash if you don't own Annihilus and you want to get Annihilus, and again, I still think he's pretty good. But if you're not a discard player, I wouldn't go for Spotlight Caches for Miek, but he still may be worth the tokens if you play a little bit discard or if you want to try it out. So that's my final thoughts on Miek. Let me know what you think of him, if you think he's going to be really good or really bad, and what decks you will be trying him in when he is released. And until then, stay positive, and I'll see you next time.